there's kind of your standard middle guard. The plus side of the middle guard is that it's got a nice strong defense. It's got a pretty obvious thrust coming out. The downside of the middle guard is that any cut requires a chambering motion. Any guard has pros and cons, things it's good at, things it's not so good at. So the middle guard is a good kind of general defensive guard, but any cut requires some kind of a chambering motion. So the next guard is a high guard. You can have it over your head or you can have it next to your head depending on your preference and what your armor allows. The plus side of this guard is that it has a nice direct cut. Actually has some pretty strong defense because you can countercut into defense. But the weakness of the guard, besides leaving certain lines open, is that if you want to stab somebody, you have to align the point forward to stab. So this is a great cutting guard. It's not such a great thrusting guard. And then the last guard that I use is actually the low guard. So some people do it in line. I actually, because I studied Italian stuff first, I tend to have kind of the open iron gate position. You can have the point in line, that's fine. This is actually a really good defensive guard. It is designed to look like you are open in the upper body. It shovels all of your opponent's offense to your upper body, and lifting to offense is actually much easier than trying to pull down, lifting to defense. So this is kind of a provoking guard. You use this out of range. I wouldn't get super close to somebody and stand there because they're gonna smack me in the head. But this is a good transition guard where if they come in, I can lift up into my defense, or I can do some cool tricky stuff with my offense. So those are really the three. In period longsword, particularly the German stuff that I study, you will also see a guard that looks like this called Ox. I don't tend to use that very much because most of the people we end up fighting are sword and shield people. And I really don't want somebody wearing their shield like a hat and running in under my sword and then I get stuck. So I tend to keep myself mostly to the middle central guard, the lower guard, and just the high guard when I want to hit people. All of those, we don't say stances, we say guards because they are transitionary places. I'm not gonna stand like this and walk up to somebody and try to fight them. I'm always gonna be flowing between them, looking for the options that are available, but my stance is always gonna be fairly central. I don't really ever do like this stuff where I'm really heavily lean forward in SCA heavy because I'm wearing 60 pounds of armor. And again, most of the people we fight are gonna be sword and shield guys. And I prefer the balance stance because when they inevitably run at me like an idiot, I want to be able to step and pivot and move. And so mobility and keeping mobility is incredibly important when you're fighting longsword against mixed weapons forms in SCA heavy combat. So that's going to be really important. Questions on anything I've said so far? Just everybody's good so far? Cool. All right.
You said 60-40 weight distribution?
So
which it's the 60?
For me, my weight distribution is actually 50-50.
Okay.
Between the two legs. So, but sometimes when I tell people to have the weight on the balls of the feet, they end up doing this, which I don't know. They look like Elvis, but I just mean that a little bit more emphasis on the balls of the feet. Duke Fabian out here used to say that you can slide a quarter under your heels, and I really like that metaphor. That kind of gives you a sense of what we're talking about. All right, so gear, armor, sword, gauntlets, stances. All right, let's talk about actual footwork. So once we've found our stance, and we have our nice balanced stance with our weight just a little bit on the balls of the feet, there are kind of three major steps that I teach. The first one is called a gather step. It's just a shuffle step, but there are a few things that are key. So I'm gonna actually do this sideways a little bit. One of the problems that I see a lot, particularly in armor, is people do what I call the fall and catch. They will fall and catch themselves. What we want to do is we want to glide. So I'm actually going to give a slight push off of my back foot and glide forward. And I actually want to land on the ball of my foot, not my heel. So I don't want that to happen. There's two reasons. One is I want the ability to bail. So if I start to come forward and the other person rushes me, the ball of foot will let me bounce back really nicely, or it'll let me step off to the other side. If I land on my heel, it's much harder to step off or to come back. So we always want to have dynamic footwork. So I'm going to push off the ball of the foot, land on the ball of the foot, and recover. So that is our gather step. And we just practice shuffling forward and shuffling back. And even on this, I'm pushing with the ball of the foot and landing on the ball of the foot so that I always have options. You want to be able to shuffle forward and back, and you want to recover stance to stance. So if I step out 4 inches, I want to recover 4 inches. Usually what happens is people over-recover the back foot and they end up very collected. We don't really want that, because if you're in armor and somebody's rushing you and your feet are together, the chance of getting knocked on your butt are pretty high, right? Or at the very least, it kind of limits our mobility. So we want to be here, and we're just going to recover to the same amount that we stepped down. That's a gather step. Next one's a passing step. Easy enough, one leg passes the other. One thing I see people do a lot, I'm not sure why exactly, but they end up kind of gating, particularly when they've got the fleeces on. They kind of step and pivot a little too wide. You want to let your hips pass through. So when I push off the back of the foot, this allows my hips to turn a little bit. Then I can have a nice normal step. A nice normal step. And I'm still landing on the balls of my feet. I'm not stepping out and landing on my heel. Because again, I want to be able to pass and push if I need to. If the bad guy's doing something I don't like, I want to be able to pass and then push back. So landing on the ball of the foot allows me to have the next motion available to me, where if I land on my heel, a lot of times that puts me stuck for a minute. And as we all get older, we start to find that it starts to put more danger on the knees, and all of us want our knees, you know. So we've got our gathering step, forward and back. We've got our passing step, forward and back. Easy enough. Always landing on the balls of the feet. If you were to come to one of my in-person classes and we did footwork for an hour, the arches of your feet and your calves should get really sore long before like your glutes and your butt. So we really put a lot of emphasis on this pushing off the ground piece so that we can be nice and dynamic and mobile all the time. So the last step that I teach is the offline step. And this is kind of a step and pivot. So rather than pass forward, we're going to pass slightly off to the side, maybe parallel, and then we're going to pivot on the ball of the foot. So we're still on the ball of the foot. This pivot happened. We don't pivot on our heel because again, we want our knees. So we're going to pivot on the ball of the foot. And what I'm doing is I'm reorienting my stance. I really don't want to cross step, particularly in armor. This is not a good place to get caught. But if, for example, if I'm facing my pel and I want to hit them, but I want to get off the line, I want my center line to stay oriented on them while theirs is broken. So I can step offline and hit them, and I'm still in a good place. If I try to cross step or something, it's not so good for us. So just remember, if you decide to practice this, we're going to step offline, maybe about parallel, and we pivot to reorient. See, I'm back in my stance. And if I go back the other way, I'm going to step out, about parallel, pivot again, and I'm back in my stance. So you can just practice this for hours, really. So if you have the gather, the passing, and the offline step, and then start trying to put them together. Footwork should happen in combinations just like blade work. So I might sit here and go gather, pass, offline, pivot, right? Gather, pass, offline, pivot. I can do a big circle. But that gets me used to moving, because when we fight with our longsword, we should be stepping every time we cut. We should not be camping out in range and trading a bunch of blows with static speed. That is bad fighting. It's not great against another longsword, and it's definitely going to get us killed against a sword and shield or a two-sword guy or something like that. So you want to be able to be out of range, come into range when you want to with an attack, and then leave again. Hopefully the bad guy is dead. But at the very least, the bad guy isn't dead. You want to get out of range so that you're not stuck and they're not wailing 50 shots at you while you're kind of frantically trying to defend. So any questions on stance or footwork? Okay, I know I'm going kind of fast because we only have an hour. I sometimes teach 3-hour classes just on footwork, so I'm condensing as much as I can. Hopefully you can come back and look at the class. And I have lots of videos and websites and stuff too.
Yeah, I got one. So you're keeping your torso always steady and upright when you're doing your stepping, correct?
Yes, we call it not breaking the T. So if I have the capital T, we don't want it to break.
Got it. Good thought. Good thought. Thank you.
And that's a good catch. Thank you for saying that. And that's really important. Sorry, that's really important with armor on, because when I put my helmet on, my center of gravity raises a little bit, right? It feels different to move around with a big 12-pound helmet on. So not having that T being broken is very, very important. So that was a really, really good catch. All right.
Kind of like a bull rider. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Kind of like a bull rider. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about offense. Okay. There are front edge cuts and there are back edge cuts. We need to be able to do both fluidly. Meyer, who's one of my favorite period masters, says if you lost the back edge cuts, you would lose half the art. I'm not sure I'm that dramatic about it, but I do agree that they're really important. And then, of course, we have a thrust. So with thrusting, soft hands is really, really important. There is kind of the central thrust, and in German longsword, this would be the under thrust because it's kind of coming slightly from underneath. sword moves first, we don't lock our arms, and then we use the body. So I'm not ever locking and letting this break. If I need to make up some range, I do it with my feet. I do not do it by locking my arms and leaning. We always want to be collected, because just like with the footwork, we always want to have the next option available. So I'm going to thrust. So you have soft hands. My elbows are not locked. And that means it's very easy for me to flip out and do something else if I need to. But if I lock and lean, I'm not getting out of that very quickly. So it's very important. We have soft hands. We lead with the sword, and then we use the body to make up any range. And that also means I don't really ever have to throw my thrusts hard, because my body is going to do the work. I can have a nice soft thrust, nice soft hands. My body comes in. I can certainly land a hard thrust, but because the mass of my body is doing it, it's actually very easy for me to control it. I can let my arms relax if that thrust is going to come in too hard, but my body is doing it. So if somebody is hesitant to take a thrust, you can just allow your body weight to give them a little extra convincing rather than trying to jam them with your arms. So it's pretty fast. It can land very hard, but it's very easy to control. So the overthrust, I don't throw very much. The overthrust is, again, from this ox position. I would rather force my opponent to move their longsword or their shield and get a thrust, again, from this other angle rather than the overthrust, because, again, if they run under that, that's a really hard recovery. The last thrust that I kind of throw, it's called a snap thrust. And this one is designed to defeat shields. That's how I developed it. And essentially, I don't even think about extending my sword. Think about raising my backhand. So we call this a snap thrust. The reason I think about raising my backhand is from this middle guard, it essentially allows my point to arc over a little bit and pop over the top of the shield. Because a lot of shield guys, they'll kind of hunker down a little bit because they're looking for that big rush in. And if I can throw this kind of arcing, sometimes it'll even hit the top of their shield and arc over and slide in and stab them in the face. So this little chip stab gives me a nice little arc over the shield. And the nice thing is that it's not super committed. My sword is still controlled and in front of my chest, which makes defense really easy to flow into. Thrusts should be your safest, least committed shot. So if you're fighting against somebody and you're trying to figure out what they're doing, is this person going to jump me? Is this person going to button up? How do they tend to fight? If you want to gather some information, a nice probing thrust should be a very safe, non-committed thing you can do to get them moving. So if I fight somebody I don't know and they're all buttoned up, I might not necessarily throw a big heavy swing at them, but I can just kind of get out here, throw some pops, right? See, I'm never really out of my central position, but I'm using my feet, I'm figuring some, and they have to deal with that. They just stand there, I'll stab them in the face. Good day, fight's over. But if they start reacting to it, I want to be in a nice, safe place. So that's kind of thrusting. There's the under thrust, there's the over thrust, which I don't use very much, and then there's the chip stab, which I use a lot against sword and shield guys because it gives me kind of a nice reaching angle over the top. Questions on thrusts? And again, tell me if I need to go slower because I'm trying to condense quite a bit of information. All right, so let's talk about body mechanics for cuts. I do not do the scissor. Again, that's not a very period way of swinging the sword. And I pretty much try to do everything in SCA that I would do out of SCA when I'm at the HEMA Club. What I do, however, do is I think more like a whip cracking motion. So the pommel hand is definitely the power hand. The Quillian hand, this is the steering wheel. So you should not be punching with your lead hand. You should be pulling with your bottom hand. So the nice thing about that is with very loose hands, and then I'm going to pull, a lot of power with very little effort. I don't need big swings if I get this kind of whip cracking motion. Now my hips drive it, right? I'm not rigid in the body and just doing it here. But I do, so it's very important. So if I'm in my middle guard, for example, I might pull back to about here, and then I'm just going to push the pommel and step through. So really, there's never a time my sword comes up behind my head. I'm always, we call this turning the little wheel. I turn the little wheel, and then I pull the pommel, right? And maybe I'll pull up to defend, and then I'm just going to push the pommel around my lead hand and let my hips turn. So it's little motions, a big power. And so this whip crack is very important. We want to move our feet when we attack, though. So again, I'm not going to stand in range and be like, all right, let's fight from here with nice static feet. I want to be out of range. I'm going to throw whatever cut I want to throw with a step. And if I want to go over there, I'm going to step, and I move through defense, and we'll talk about defense in a minute. I don't really want to get hit in the gaps of my offense. So when I transition, I will roll up a little bit to keep my head covered. Then I will push, and I will do that with the pivot. That gets me on this side of the sword. So I'm safer than I would be. The pivot allows me to power my shot with very little arm motion, and then that keeps me safe. So when I do, for example, raise your hand if you have done or currently do the 1 through 6 drill. Raise your hand if you've heard of the 1 through 6 drill. Brilliant. Okay, as long as we've heard of it, we're good. So when I do my 1 through 6, my feet move on every attack. So 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4. All of my attacks start out of range. I might transition into something, and then I hit, and I leave, and I'm back out of range. This is really important. So your feet should provide power for your shots. Your feet should provide angles for your shots. So that's the other thing, is I don't do like leans and try to hit down there. If I want to hit over there, I will step over there. And I will try to keep my torso centered, right? I don't want this stuff. Because if I'm doing this, even if I hit him, I'm going to get clunked on the head. So we're doing nice whip cracking body mechanics, pushing the pommel around the lead hand, moving through defense on the way to offense, always stepping, and always ending back out of range. Very important. So that's all lead stuff. With back edge stuff, there's really kind of two kinds of back edge attacks. There are what I call rotational back edge attacks and lever back edge attacks. So let me do this. So with a rotational back edge attack, if my lead hand is here, I'm going to push the pommel away from me and then pull it back behind my head. And that's going to bring the back edge around in a rotation. This is a Myers helicopter of death. So one good way to practice is you're going to push and pull this pommel kind of up above your head. And that's going to put the back edge into the bad guy. I'm going to push the pommel, puts the lead edge into the back guy on the offside, and then I pull the pommel back around. I throw an onside again with my back edge. So you can just practice and see that my hips are doing the work. I'm just practicing throwing back edge, front edge, just getting used to the helicopter of death. When that starts feeling good, you can start throwing to the 4 quadrants. So I might go high back edge, low front edge, low back edge, high front edge, and get used to throwing the helicopter of death to all 4 quadrants. That's really important. And this is nice. This particular one can be great if somebody gets in tight on us and we don't like it. So if a shield guy gets in on me, right, shield guy is here, one of the things that I like to do is I'll keep this here to defend, and then I will pivot this back foot away, and I will throw this back edge to the back of their head behind their shield. Which is great. If I'm up against a longsword guy and we've gotten stuck into a tight cross, where we're here, right, and we're pressed here, I can actually hit them around the back of their sword with this back edge shot, which is kind of cool. And then if you're doing period longsword, one of the standard back edge usages is you throw a back edge shot with the step out, and this actually defends against their cut, and you get to hit them in the head, which is pretty cool. You feel like a ninja if you parry their shot and hit them at the same time. It's good stuff. So when you're doing that 1 through 6 drill, start alternating. Go back edge, true edge, back edge, true edge, back edge, true edge, back edge, true edge. Start throwing all your onsides with the back edge, and then true edge, and you can start doing that. So those rotational back edges are really important. The lever back edge in SCA fighting is a little bit more specialized. This is kind of your more standard. They've thrown over here, you block down, and then you whack them in the back of the head, right? Raise your hand if you've seen that one. It's more common with glaives because you have a longer lever arm, but longsword people do it as well. I don't like doing it on the onside. The cross arm one is not very good. It's really hard to hit right. The lever back edge on this side, definitely doable. The big problem I see people doing is because they're trying to involve their body, they end up shoveling because they kind of hit and slide, right? They do this. So this would be the time where I really focus on my lead hip, coming back with my lead hand. And this is actually more like the scissors. So I'm looking for a pop with the hands, but the hip has to do it. But don't let your arms shovel up because you'll just kind of hit and push them and slide them and it won't stick. So when you're doing, yeah, you guys can see this. So when I'm here, if I do this, I'm going to hit with the wrong part of the sword. That will work out pretty well. So I'm going to keep my hands low. I'm going to pull back the lead hand. Oops. And I'm just going to look for that nice short pop. Like that. So that's kind of the lever back edge. So I really only do that when somebody's thrown a low attack at me and I've chopped down onto it and then I back edge them in the back of the head. That's a cool one. But that's about the only time I really throw lever back edge cuts. I use a ton of back edge cuts in SCA combat, but they're usually the rotational ones. And you can throw that from the middle guard. You can throw it from the high guard. You can throw it from the low guard, although that's definitely a bigger tell. But if you start practicing the rotational back edge cut on the Pell with the 1 through 6, it should start to feel natural for you. So that should work out pretty well. Questions on offense, as I feel like I'm rushing so much, but I want to make sure we get everything in there. Good so far?
I need to leave. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I need to leave. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Can I ping you on Facebook and somehow,
Of course.
look at, you could find me your material online and things like that. So.
Yep. Good to see you. I appreciate you coming.
Yeah, good to see you too. And whenever I think about Fiore and the SCA, you're that guy. You're that guy.
Well, I mean, that is what I was trying to do first.
Yeah, I remember that long ago and far away.
Yep.
So anyway,
Right.
I have to leave. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And
Yep.
Have a great day. All right.
All right. We're talking about defense. Unless you had any sword fighting questions about offense. We're good? All right. So defense. There's really two. Most of your upper body defense in SCA heavy combat really should be the A frame. So when we say A frame, what we're saying is you're in that middle stance. We're going to turn our body and we're going to make one leg of a capital A. This is very important. We want the point to stay mostly on the center line. If I do this, I'm going to get slotted on top of the head, right? But if I can turn my body so that I have an angle, see how the point is over my head, but I've turned to cover the left side. So I've got one leg of a capital A. This will deal with horizontal stuff and vertical stuff. So we do not want the point to stack over. We want to have one leg of a capital A, and then of course we have the other leg of a capital A. So we're just going to essentially turn and look at the threat with our lead edge facing, and we come back, and then we turn and look at the threat, and we come back. And we're just trying to have the two legs of a capital A. It doesn't matter which foot is in front. We turn to look at the threat, come back, turn to look at the threat, come back. The reason the body part is so important is I could do kind of an A-frame with just extended arms, and that's cool, right? I probably won't get hit, but I also, my body is not primed for a counterattack, so I'm kind of dead in the water. So wrist stuff, not so good. But if I turn my body, now my hips are primed, I can just do that pommel push and hit with the nice hip turn. So if I'm facing my Pell, I can turn, right, and nice and easy, just with the hips coming back. So I get a nice defense, I get a nice counter attack right away. So, and then the nice thing too is that because my point is online, it also makes it very easy to come back with a thrust. So really, I like to say that 80% of your upper body defense really should be the A frame. So we're just getting used to turning. The turning of the edge is really important because again, I could push over like this, and if things are coming down and they don't run into my quillions, I'm probably gonna get my thumb ripped off. And I know that hand shots are not legal in SCA heavy, but they still suck. And I don't like getting hit in the hands. It makes me feel like a goober. So I want to make sure that I don't get hit ever, really ideally. So again, I'm going to turning the long edge. Not only does Meyer tell us to parry with the long edge, so it's totally period, but the quillions get in the way and they protect us from stuff sliding down. Good, okay. And then same thing. So we turn and look at the threat with the long edge. We turn and look at the threat with the long edge, trying to keep our point on that central line. The other thing is this is somewhat extended. I'm here, right? I am not like this for a couple of reasons. One is if I get stuck here, if the person aggresses and I've now defended with my sword tight to my body and my point online, not only do I not have a good counterattack, not only am I likely to get wrapped if it's a sword shield guy or a two sword guy because this is too close to my body, but I'm probably stuck. If somebody pushes up against me and I have this extended guard, the engagement is essentially happening in front of me. If I pull back onto my body to defend, now the engagement is happening on me, and now I have to worry about getting them off of me, getting that engagement off of me. And that puts me behind in the fight. So it's not a good physical position, but also from a who's in control of the fight, I am now behind. I've accepted this engagement on my person, and I have to try to get it off of me before I can do other stuff. I'm behind. And again, you're much more likely to get wrapped. So A-frame left, A-frame right. The other big one is the hanging guard. So the hanging guard, I'm sure it looks like this. Everybody's probably seen this, the hanging guard. you can certainly fight out of it, and I do sometimes, but it is more useful as a transitionary movement. So if I'm in my middle guard and I roll up, and this is where those loose hands are important, if I defend the right side of my body, I'm in the uncrossed hanging guard. See, my arms are not crossed. I'm looking under my quillions, and this is mostly going along my forearm, and I'm gonna turn my body to address the threat. I'm not gonna shove it over, because if I shove over, you see what peeks out is my elbow. So I wanna hide behind my sword like the brave knight that I am, right? So I'm gonna be here, and we're gonna turn the body. The other nice thing is if I turn the body to address the threat, again, my body's engaged for that nice big overcut. If I kind of push over, now maybe I'm kind of stuck. So we want that little bit of space. We're gonna turn the body. The cross hanging guard is usually a little harder for people, but you are a cross hanging guard. You're still looking under the quillions, still mostly going along your forearm. You're still turning your body. Try not to hang out there very long. It's just more awkward with the crossed arms. And then with gauntlets and a big SCA helmet, it's even more awkward. The way I practice it, well, so the way I teach it is we actually start very basic. Have people start in a horse stance. We put our sword in the dirt, and then we roll up to the right hanging guard. We put the sword in the dirt, then we roll up to the left hanging guard. We put the sword in the dirt. If you go right, your right hand is loose. I actually let the sword turn in my hand. I'm essentially doing a saber block with a firm left hand. And then I stick my hand. So that's on the right. When I go left, now my left hand is loose because I'm essentially doing a saber block with my right hand, and then my left hand is loose. So I just roll up. On the Pell, we practice something called the ladder drill. So I will hit to the right, block to the right, hit to the left, block to the left, middle attack, block to the right, middle left, block to the left, high right, block to the right, high left, block to the left. Now we'll just work my way down the ladder. And even with that, I move my feet. So generally, when I step, I'm gonna step out when I block, and then pivot when I cut, and then step out when I block, and pivot when I cut. So even when I'm practicing my ladder drill, my feet are still moving with every sword motion. If we had 3 hours together, you would hear me say that for 3 hours, that the feet have to move when the sword moves. It's very, very important. So A-frame, hanging guard really should be the bulk of your upper body defense. Shit happens. Try not to use the St. George guard. This just opens up the body really badly. Probably gonna get hit in the hands, and there's not a good offense from there. Questions on the A-frame or the hanging guard? Everybody's good so far? All right. Leg defense. Number one defense is no be there. So you should void leg attacks. So if I'm fighting at a range where my opponent swings at my leg, a little tiny step back or a little tiny scoot back should remove my leg, and then I can hit them in the head or the shoulder. Geometry being what it is, an extended sword has longer range than a downward angled sword. So that's ideal. And we really should be controlling range and angle as much as we can with our footwork and our timing, so that if they throw at our legs, we are in a place to void the leg and hit them. If we are not in a place where we can do that, second best is to cut down on their cut. So if somebody cuts at my leg, I'm still gonna void the leg because that's ideal, but I'm actually gonna cut down onto their cut. This does a couple of things. It deflects their cut, but it also puts my blade and my quillions in front of my hand. What a lot of people do is they punch. Totally can work, but the downside is that if you punch, see how my quillions are above my hand? They're not protecting my hand at all. If I misjudge this, I'm gonna get hit in the hand. And again, might not be legal in SCA combat, but it sucks, and I feel like a goober. I really don't wanna get hit in the hand. But if I cut down, my quillions are protecting me. So in a perfect world, I'm gonna cut down onto their cut, and that puts me in a nice over position where I have a dominant position, and then I can start doing those lever cuts, or I can stab them, or I can just get out of there if I need to. So step number one, don't be there. We void the leg, we hit them at the same time. Step number two is we countercut on top of their cut. Number three, if you have to punch, what I want you to think about is getting your quillions ahead of your hand. So do not punch your pommel down, straight down. First of all, you're gonna have to bend, and again with the hand. So if you have to punch, think about punching your quillions down, and think about sinking a little bit, but we want to be as upright as we can. Because if I do this and I misjudge, or even if I get it, their next shot's probably going to take me in the head. So if you do have to punch, which would be the third best option, option C, try to get the quillions in front as opposed to punching your pommel straight down, where you're going to get hit in the hands. But our range should be in a place where we're voiding the leg, and I would say even against other dukes and high-level fighters, I void my leg 80–90% of the time. Very rarely do I have to block a leg shot, just because I managed to maintain the range and angles that I want. And a lot of that has to do with the pre-fencing, the kind of jockeying for position before people actually start swinging the swords. We'll talk about that more in the strategy and tactics section, which we will hopefully have time for. So just remember, void the leg, chop the leg shot, or if you have to punch, try to get those quillions ahead. The nice thing is that still gets our point ahead, so we can counter with the thrust. Questions on leg defense? Everybody's good? All right, everybody's good. I have my notes here. All right, so that actually takes us to strategy and tactics. So strategy is the kind of overall plan of the fight. What do I want to do? I want to control range and engagement. Tactics are the things you do to make your strategy happen. Does that make sense? All right, so strategy is the overall plan. Tactics are the little bits that you do. So when we talk about control of range, this really happens, again, before people start swinging. So my engaging range is a step out. The fight has started when I'm about a step out from that person. So the fight does not start here. The fight starts out here. So when I'm moving for position, I will take as long as I need to make sure that I'm getting the start of an engagement where I want it. So back to that thrusting thing, when I fight a new person, I'm not sure what they kind of want to do, I'll kind of come out and I'll throw these little pop thrusts at them, and I want to get a little bit of information. They will tell you what kind of a fight they want to bring you. So let's say we're fighting against, the evil sword and shield guy, the bane of all longsword guys' existence, and he's doing his thing, he or she is doing their thing, and you throw that little pop thrust and you see this. This is the motion that you see. What kind of fight does that person want to bring you? Anybody have any ideas? Okay, I'll tell you.
I'm not experienced in sword and shield enough, so I'll have to let.
So, but it doesn't matter, right? It's a posture thing. If you throw that thrust at somebody and you see this motion, they want to jump you, right? This is the thing, is they're looking for this. But if you throw that little pop thrust at somebody and you see this, that person's probably going to button up. So just from that information, I can kind of tell, all right, when this kind of tension breaks and movement happens, is this person going to come at me? Is this person going to button up? Where are they going to go? What kind of fight are they trying to bring me? And that's going to affect where I essentially set up in my position to see what I'm going to want to do. So if I have somebody that is showing me that they want to jump me, right? Their twitchy is a kind of forward twitchy. I am probably pretending my Pel's the opponent. I'm actually not going to step in like this, because if they rush me, I'm going to end up too tight. I might actually start my motion with the step out because I know they're going to step into my shot. So I'm looking not for where we are, but where we are potentially going to be, because you want to be ahead in the fight. So by contrast, if I see somebody, even if it's a longsword person, if I throw this little poppy thrust and they start doing this stuff, oh, they're not coming at me. They're either going to stay put or they're going to backpedal. So maybe I am free to scooch in like an inch closer than I would have, because I know that I need to make up that distance a little bit. So a lot of the control of range and angles happens before the engagement has started. And in the German longsword stuff, they talk all the time about the pre-fencing, essentially. And that's what this is. If you've ever watched two really high-level fighters fight, and it doesn't matter what discipline, HEMA, SCA rapier, cut and thrust, SCA heavy, karate guys, you'll see a lot of like the little twitchy, jockeying for position, and people are like, nothing's happening. They're doing a whole bunch. They're both trying to figure out how that pre-fencing is working out. Because against really high-level fighters, if you get the pre-fencing wrong, you are behind in the fight. And two high-level fighters are knowing that. And basically it comes down to when they feel comfortable enough to accept an engagement. So it's really important that you pay a lot of attention to that stuff. You can use these little probing attacks. You can shift your feet. Where I want to be is going to affect my stance. If I want to end up on the right-hand side, I am probably not going to set up with the right foot lead because that would mean I would have to cross my feet. If I know a step and a half in, I want to be to the right, I'm probably going to be left because that's going to let me pass my open side and then pivot. If I want to go left, I might have my left foot back. If I want to go that way, now I'm going to have to maybe step and then pivot. So that is not something I would do against somebody that has that kind of twitchy, I want to jump your shit vibe, because I'm not going to have time for that. I have time for one step maybe. But if I know that there's somebody that's a little bit more static or controlled, now maybe I can start to develop some more complicated footwork because they're going to give me the time to do that. You know, Meyer, I know I reference him a lot. He says that if you're a defensive fighter, you're either a master or a fool because you have to be really good to just stand there and defend stuff and not get hit. So if somebody is inclined to do that, I'm going to be careful, but I'm going to know I have time to try to pull out some tricky stuff to mess with them a little bit. So movement, creating openings. Particularly sword and shield guys, I think, have this problem the most, but I see with longsword guys, they throw at what they see, not what's going to happen. And that's a problem. You need to throw at what's going to happen. So I'll give you, two examples. When I fight sword and shield guys, usually if they want to run me, there are a few classic setups. One that I show all the time because it's easy to show this concept is the thrust to hip. So imagine my pal's the evil sword and shield guy, and he wants to rush me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do that little pop thrust, knowing that the likely response is they're going to lift. That's fine. I want them to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to thrust, step off line with my sword up, and then hit them in the hip as they go by. Because the likeliest thing that's going to happen is when I thrust, they're going to lift, and then they're going to keep running to try to hit me. So I know that on their second step, the hip shot will become available. So I'm not trying to beat an angle of a shield that I see. I'm throwing at the thing that will be open because I created movement. I want to create a transition place. Against a longsword person, probably the classic example is a little 1-2 fake, right? So if I'm in this middle guard and I turn my hips and I push, I'm going to throw to this side to get them to defend to one side. And then I'm going to fall back to the original side. I'm getting them to move and then hitting the place they just moved from. So I'm not trying to look at them going, how do I beat the angle that I see? I'm trying to create motion in my opponent and then hit the opening that will be created. So if they're here and I get them moving, this was my original target. I faked over here to get them moving, then I hit them over here. So you want to think about essentially whoever is better at the what comes next game in fighting wins. So you want to, but too many people, they look at their opponent like they're a statue and they start trying to compute how to beat the angles they see. And that's okay, but a good fighter is just not going to let you do that. But if you can move them in that motion, in that transitionary period, that's the time you get to hit them. So you want to think about not beating what you see, but beating what you know will happen. And I am the type of fighter that I prefer to make things happen with my offense. Some fighters are counter punchers, and so they like to make things happen with their defense. They'll kind of, look, I'm so open to get the person to throw, and then they block it and build their defense off of that. And that is 100% valid. That is still creating transitions and motions. I have pretty average reflexes, so I would rather do it with my offense because I know what's coming. So that's how I tend to do. Okay, and then I think one of the things that really made a difference for me with being a longsword guy fighting in open lists where everybody had sword and shields and pole weapons, that kind of stuff, is I had to learn patience. A shitty engagement is just a shitty engagement. If things are going badly, you are under no obligation to take that engagement and try to win it anyway. So the problem is I had a lot of pride, and so when things were starting to go south, or I was trying to work that pre-fencing and the other person would do something I didn't really like, I'd be like, well, I'm going to take it, I'm going to beat him anyway, which you can do to a certain level of fighter. But once you start fighting the top guys in any discipline, if they are happy, you probably are not. So we are under no obligation to accept a shitty engagement. And that's why that movement thing is really important. If I'm trying, for example, that thrust to hip shot that I like so much, right? I've done the thrust hip shot, and all of a sudden, that shield guy, he scoots, he shows lateral motion. He goes sideways. This thing is not working anymore. I could try to force him to finish it, but if they've gotten ahead of me in the fight, they're likely going to just block and crack me in the head. So maybe I do my thrust, I start to see, oh shit, that's not going to work. And because I'm on the balls of my feet, I can just pivot and weave. And now I come all the way back out of range, and I try again. You don't get points for killing them faster. You just get points for staying alive and making the bad guy be dead. So if that takes 2 minutes or 4 minutes, it doesn't really matter as long as you get to stay alive. So make sure that, because really, if you control when the fight happens, where the fight happens, you're probably going to win that engagement. If you lose control of one or more of those things, you're probably going to lose that engagement. So if you've lost control of the engagement, reset and try again. That's kind of the big thing. If you, how are we doing on time? Okay. If you do find yourself just on the back foot and backpedaling because you got rushed by the sword and shield guy or the two sword guy or even the pole guy, I don't know, some of them run at you. The important thing is that when we back up, we do not want to lead with our chest and shoulders. This breaks that T. My upper body is now disengaged from my lower body. I can't throw very well. So if anything, lead with your butt, right? But we're moving back on the balls of the T, and try to have like a 2 or 3 step rule and then pivot. So one of the things I do with my students is we'll have them get very, very close. We'll practice 1, 2, pivot off the line, right? 1, 2, pivot off the line. We want to break off of the person that's rushing us, because once they've gotten about 2 steps in, if they're really rushing us, their energy is likely going forward. If we can step and pivot, often they will go right on by you. And then you get to whack them in the butt, and that's kind of fun, right? You get to feel like a matador. It's good times. But if we get stuck backpedaling, if I'm just running backwards and this person's running forward, the distance never changes. It's just like I planted. I'm just using a lot of energy, but I'm not getting any benefit. So we want to practice the ability to push off and pivot. And that's why that lively footwork is so important. So think about leading with your butt. Think about backpedaling, stepping, and pivoting. Practice it slowly at first, because if it's a new motion, you can't just magically do stuff without practice. And just work on being able to smoothly change direction in your footwork. And when you start feeling comfortable with that, think about, pivot and hit, maybe with that back edge, maybe with that lead edge. But you have to change the dynamics of a fight if they get you on the heels and you're backpedaling. Otherwise, you're just going to get mushed. Or you get right into the list ropes and they make you reset and used all that energy for nothing. So get used to that. One last piece, and then I'll just open up for general questions because I know we're about out of time. When we talk about control range and footwork, that does not always mean backwards. That can mean forwards. One of the good things that you can do against somebody that's rushing you is you can step forward and offline, and that collapses the range a little faster than they were thinking, but you're getting off the line. So I almost think of it as like being a bouncy Super Bowl. So they rush at me, I'm going to step and pivot, and I will let my sword whack on their shield or whack on their pole weapon, but I'm still looking to kind of roll off of them because I want to collapse the range a little bit faster and then get out. So it's almost like an exchange. They rush you, you hit them and roll off, and now you're back in the middle. This is really good for small list fields where you don't have a lot of room to back up. In the West Kingdom, we tend to have pretty big lists, but if I'm in an enclosed environment, I will actually step forward and pivot and roll rather than let them run me back into the edge of the list field. So I think, yeah, all right. So that was what is normally several hours of lecture, really, really quick. I have hundreds of drills. I have a website that has a lot of the drills and some links to some of the videos and things. So if you're interested, that's a good thing to check out, because this really was kind of an overview. But the way I fight longsword in the SCA is fairly unique. As far as I know, I'm the only longsword duke there is. And I came from a HEMA background first, so that affects kind of how I think about things compared to some of my my other friends that fight. But are there any questions or comments on this? Because I know we're supposed to end at 55. So
nothing to do after this, so I can still host it as long as people can ask questions.
Good. I was rushing a little bit, but I'm glad we have a little time.
What's the website?
It is SCABastardsword.com. And so the last few years, I wrote a book that I put out for free. It's Heavy Longsword in the Style of Joachim Meyer. I also put out a sword and buckler book on period sources, so that's cool. But the front page of SCA Bastard Sword has kind of like your really basic standard SCA longsword stuff that isn't really master specific, and so that would be a good place to look. But there are videos of a bunch of my crown fights and some of the classes that I've taught, so that should be helpful as well.
Courtney, did you have a question?
You answered it.
Um,
Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say so I just stepped down as the Society Historic Combat Studies Deputy for A&S. So I love the references back to the masters, and this is much appreciated.
Awesome. Yeah. So I started as a Fiore guy. And then when I came to the SCA, because Fiore is so grapple heavy, I realized pretty quickly that the German stuff, which has a much more blade work heavy emphasis, not that they don't have grappling, but they have more blade work, translated easier to our particular combat sport. So that's, and now I love it, and I run a Meyer club, and it's good times.
Thank you.
Sure, I hope it was helpful. I know I was talking really fast, so I apologize for that.
The only thing I was going to ask about was other Pell work and drill things, and you pointed us to your website, so I know where I'm looking for this week.
So the other thing is I'm actually doing a backyard, because we're stuck in quarantine and we haven't been able to train. I'm doing a backyard basics YouTube series. So every week I'm putting out 2 videos, one that's kind of general and then one that is master specific. The link for that is on I believe it's on the website, but also if you just search my name, Mark Hollingshead, in YouTube, then that should pop up. And I think we have about 45 videos currently, and we're adding more every week. So that hopefully would be a good resource as well.
Thank you.
Awesome.
All right. Anything else? Anybody?
No, thank you. This
Cool.
is fantastic. Yes, apples. Go.
Thank you all for attending.
Thanks for coming, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. I love talking training, and since I can't train right now, I'm extra desperate to talk swords. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.